Hello, welcome back to Go and Walkabout. In today's episode I continue with my authentication project and I'm going to link an Apple ID to an existing Firebase account. When offering users also to sign in with Apple, I also need to have a mechanism that I can link an Apple ID to an existing email password account. And that is what we're going to do in this episode. Now, this is not yet the sign in with Apple, that will come in the next episode, but today I'm going to link an existing Apple ID to an existing Firebase account. So how that will look is like this. If we are here in the simulator, then I can go to my settings and I can link a connected account. Now I cannot really demo this because if I do this, I get my sign in with Apple and I can continue this, but on the simulator it doesn't work. I'll demo it later on a device as I have here. But first, let's walk through the code. Now you can see here already that we're in the settings application, and that's the settings view we see here. If we continue scrolling down, you see here I have connected accounts Apple, and I unlink Apple account and I show whether it's connected or disconnected. Now my view model, of course, as always, is doing all the work. So let's go to the view model. If we go to the view model, there's a few things you will see here. On top, I have some published variables. If it has a password, meaning it has an email password account, not using it but might need it later, has Apple, has Google, because I also have an idea to create a sign in with Google, but for now I focus on the Apple part. And these variables need to be set, and they're actually here. When I refresh or when I open the settings application, I'll go to my authentication manager and ask if this user has an Apple, Google or a password account. And then later on I can use this here in my link unlink. If it has Apple, I will link it using my authentication manager from the previous episode, or I can unlink it using the same authentication manager. So the view model is taking care of the business logic of the view, but the actual business logic for all the sign-in logic, as you remember from the previous episode, is in my authentication manager. So let's have a look at the authentication manager. Now, the authentication manager does a couple of important things. It has Apple flag, as Google has password, and it will return has a provider with the Apple option. Now this has provider, and this is functionality that is given by Firebase. So Firebase, if you have a user, you can request what are the providers linked to this user, because Firebase has the ability to link multiple providers to single users. Now we have a user with an email and password, and we want to link the Apple ID or Apple user to this particular user. And default in my situation with email and password, every user only has one provider, but after we have completed this project you will see that for this particular user it will have a second provider. And we can ask here the provider data, we find the first that matches the option we request for. And then later we can use this, what we said here in the business model, to decide whether we want to link or unlink, and here in the view to show whether it is disconnected or connected, as you can see that here. And if we connect, we will of course go to this part, and I'll show it later, and then it will turn into connected in disconnect. So okay, anyway, we can toggle the connection and disconnection. But let's go into the application manager, because if we want to link here, we want to link it with Apple, and this is the whole story behind sign in with Apple. And it's important to understand that with many of the Apple APIs, it's so that you request the OS to do something, the OS will do it, in this case to sign in, and then when it is done signing in, it will call you back through a delegate. So it's always an asynchronous behavior. You see that in a lot of Apple APIs. Request something, for instance the in-app purchases that I did in the past, you request to do the purchase, when the purchase is complete they will call you back. And this is exactly how also the sign in with Apple works. So what you do, you create a request, my Apple ID request, there's a little bit of a hub function here to set up all the things with the nonces and the currents, and that's what you can read in the documentation. So far it's just doing work to sign in with Apple. So you create your Apple ID request, that's done here on top, and then you set your authorization controller, delegate. And that's important. So you set a delegate on that request so that if the request is complete, they can call you back through the delegate. You set some additional flags and it's done. So once you do that, you kind of give control to the OS. The OS does its thing. That's actually, so if I do this, now this part is all controlled by the operating system, and that is managed by Apple. If I cancel, they call me back and I can take action. If I sign in, they call me back and I can take action. So what is important, that we have this delegate itself implemented in my authentication manager. And here at the bottom, and we will use that same delegate also for the real sign-in later on. It's a little bit further. We have created an extension on my authentication manager implementing the Apple sign-in authorization controller delegate, and that actually calls this function, and in this function we're going to do the work. So we need to check the nonce, we need to check whether we got an Apple ID token, then we have an ID string, a state. Anyway, that's all standard stuff of the documentation. You need to verify what you get back is valid in order to continue. Then we can create, and this is where we create a Firebase credential with apple.com with that ID string that here we have gotten from our Apple ID, and the nonce, and we continue. The state is what we passed in. We are currently interested in linking because we called it with the link flag and not with the sign in. That will come later. And then we get, if we have a current user, we go through the logic. And this logic is a little bit more complicated because Firebase has this idea that you can only have an email account per application once. So if the Apple ID has the same email as an email you already have, they will do the merging. If that is not the case, they will raise an error. Or there will be a situation that your Apple ID is already assigned to the app through a different user. You will get an error. Anyway, if you do this correctly, you can get the account linked. And when it is linked, I call my onComplete, and that's in various stages. So this is just some error handling to make sure that it is done. We have a user, and we call the onComplete. And the onComplete is what we actually passed in here. That is then the user, and we get the message, and we don't need to do anything with the message, just setting that it is okay. Yeah, and that maybe could be a little bit better error handling, but as far as I've been able to test it, all my logic here deals with the correct error handling and will only link it when it is possible. Now, you can already see my sign-in case. I've been working on that already a little bit, but I'll do that in the next episode. And this is actually all there is to it. So now you want to have the demo. And if I want to go to demo, I need to do that on my device. So let's, my application, you see it's with the trips. I can go through, I can go to my settings, and we see the Apple here connect. If I connect, I get now my sign-in details. And this is also important, I'll explain in a minute, because I'm doing this for the very first time right now, and when you do it the first time, you get more information about the user when you do it the second time, because this is the first time, it shows my full name, etc., and I can continue. It will check my face in this case, it's done, and you will see it's connected now. And of course, if I disconnect, it can go back. Now, let's verify that the connection worked. So we can go here to Firebase Authentication. This was the original situation. And I can refresh, and on this we can now see that we have an Apple ID and an email password account. So I have connected the account. So in the next episode I should be able to log in with that Apple account and then continue. But let's first now go on the device and disconnect it. So I disconnect it, it's disconnected, it did the same logic. Let's refresh, and it's disconnected. And now you see I can link different accounts to each other and make sure that an existing user with an email and password can choose to link his Apple account and then continue sign in with Apple ID. I found that important to do because there must always be choice, and it's very strange offering Apple ID but it doesn't work for existing users. So this is an important step in getting to a sign in with Apple. Now there's one thing I need to show, because if we connect now again, you will see we get a lot less information here on the screen. And it only tells you once you want to sign in, we can continue, and it continues to work, it's done, it goes to disconnect now, and if we refresh here, it's connected again. So that's all there is to it. Now, if you want to test first scenario versus second scenario, that is a little bit tricky because you need to go to your Manage Apple ID, and of course I need to re-sign in here. And in your Apple ID you can see which apps are connected. So here in the sign in with Apple, if you open that, you see a list with applications that you have been using that Apple ID for, and there you can remove it. So once it's in the list, it stays in the list. Even in my case, I disconnect, it stays in the list because Apple registered this particular app ID with this Apple ID belong to each other, and I'll remember that for the future. So the second time you use that, I'll only share, or I'll only give you the ID, and not the first time use where I have some extra information with the email and the name. So if you want to test your first scenario, what in a testing scenario you need to do all the time, click here on the view details, get to your app, remove the app, and then you have a fresh slate, and then you can get all the credentials again. And you will see me using this in the next episode, because if I want to sign in, of course I also want to get the name, to create an account, etc. But that's for later. As you can see, there's not that much to it. You just follow the instructions for Apple to create your request for signing in. You accept the delegate, you connect it together. There's a little bit of Firebase authentication there as well. It's actually pretty well documented on the Firebase site, but now you have seen it working in an application that covers everything. In the next episode, we'll do the sign in with Apple, but for now, this is it. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you like it, please like and subscribe. If you didn't like it, subscribe anyway, because the next one might be better for you. I'll thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the Sign In with Apple episode.